Right, there we go. Thank you, Ron, very much. I have a personal question for you right away off the top. When did you graduate from Newberry Park Academy?
1962.
Do you remember who the valedictorian of that class was?
You know, for many years I didn't remember, but one time a few years ago I stopped there and I went down the hallway and looked at all the class pictures, and lo and behold, I was listed as the valedictorian. I had completely forgotten.
Don't you think that's a remarkable story? You arrived on campus, I think, in a relative's convertible with hardly anything,
Yeah.
and worked your way through school there and did very well. So Adventist education served you well, as it has many of us.
Yeah.
Also, just by word of good news, that is McKinley's article on the topic that we discussed in Sabbath school is working its way through the peer review process with very positive reactions. So it's encouraging to me to think that our little Sabbath school is having this kind of impact. McKinley anticipates presenting this material before the legislatures in Oregon and California and elsewhere. So this is fine. Thank you, McKinley, for doing all this for us. We can't be more specific about it right now because it's going through the review process, but so far so good. McKinley, do you want to say anything?
Well, I just want to thank the class and thank you, David, and Bronwyn for that opportunity to present to the class. And I think Dr. Bob, what's his last name? Ford. Yes,
Yep.
Was a part of that too. It's just an example again of how our Adventist training can have some impacts across the world beyond just the spiritual role that we play. So thank you very much.
Thank you, McKinley. Okay, Forrest, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you again. And I'm going to go to Sue first. Sue, but I'm going to answer your question about Sligo. Were you the one asking me about that?
Yeah.
That's Sligo Seventh-day Adventist Church in Tacoma Park.
Oh.
They have a class first thing in the morning. And what does it last? An hour, I think, an hour and a half, maybe. Anyway, but you can get onto that from your home. So
I see.
okay. Anyway, by the way, do you get the thing that Ron Graybill sends out of all the options for Sabbath schools on Sabbath morning?
I get something from David, but I don't.
I tell you what, I'll get you linked up to it.
Let me, this is Ron, let me mention that I would think that most of you are probably on my email list, but I create a PDF, I start with a Word document, a PDF, that shows, I think, 13 progressive Adventist Zoom classes that meet every week. And the Faith and Reason class is the class that Roy Branson actually started at Sligo Church many years ago. Chuck Sandifer runs it now. But Faith and Reason at the Sligo Church is one of those classes. And then we have the one from Walla Walla, and the one from a couple of them from Andrews and other places. And so I send that list out usually on Thursday or Friday, and people can then write to the coordinator for that particular class, and then they'll get the Zoom link for that class each week. And they'll see who's speaking and what the topic will be, so they can decide if they want to spend part of their Sabbath listening to that.
Oh, that'd be great.
Ron, could you give us your email address for this and also for the first volume of your publications soon to appear?
Okay, the email address is rgraybill, that's Grayb as in boy, ILL, rgraybill44 @gmail.com. And you can ask for the weekly list of Zoom Sabbath schools. and for the Life Works of Ron Graybill, Volume 1. Then when Volume 2 is ready, I'll let you know about that.
I'm so glad you're doing that. So this material will be more widely available to all of us, because it was very, very provocative then, and it's still now. Okay.
Well, and one of the, and David, one of the things I'm doing is with each article, I show the cover of that magazine, and then the actual pages of the article, and on the cover I put the reference, so that so if you want to cite it in a paper, you have the volume number and the date and pages and all of that stuff, so that it'd be easy to cite the article if you want to.
That's very helpful, exceedingly helpful.
Okay. Yeah, thank you too, Ron. I've appreciated that. I even went to Australia on Friday to get in a class one time. So thank you for your work on that, Ron. It's not easy to do. So thank you. Anyway, okay. Sue, we're coming to you now.
Yeah, I missed what Mark Finley got flack for, giving comfort to the enemy. What exactly he said?
Okay, here's what he said. When the General Conference first announced that they were going to distribute millions of copies of The Great Controversy, this fellow who did this particular video, he said, I was very pleased because this Jesuit Paulson was out of office and we had a new president, Ted Wilson, who promised to distribute the Great Controversy by the millions. And then he said, I was so disappointed because before very long, it turned out they were not distributing the Great Controversy. They were distributing this very much condensed version of the Great Controversy, which left out so many testing truths. And it was called the Great Hope, which I call the Great Hoax. And then he shows Mark Finley coming on and saying, I want to assure you that I had nothing to do with the selection or the decision to condense the Great Controversy. But then he went on to say that I think it's a good thing. We want to get out the essential message and so on. And since Mark Finley said that the Great Hope was a good thing, this fellow saw Mark Finley as another evidence that the General Conference and the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church was being unfaithful.
All right, thanks.
All right, thank you. By the way, David, would you make me a co-host again on that flip back and forth? I got demoted. So, okay, I'd like to go now to Ruth Christensen, our defender of Denmark. Ruth?
Unmute, Ruth, unmute.
Okay. You got it, Ruth, or?
Unmute.
She's trying. No. Tell you what, Ruth, you work on that. I'm going to go to McKinley. Did you have a question you wanted to ask today?
It's a comment, but perhaps others can before I do.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
Okay.
I'm
All right,
on
Joe.
now.
Okay, here she is. Ruth, over to you.
There are several things that are just comments quickly. Our church at Green Lake had a pastor who many of you know, John McCarty, wanted to be sure that we always only had all representative on our persons of any place, anywhere in the world, who could be there with their flags on Flag Day. And that's the only time we had the flags up for anybody. And then another comment, I think a lot of Danes speak English. Almost all the ones that I've come across of cousins and so forth. And that's common. And that happiness is really very common. It's a great place to
Okay.
And then finally, a request. The emails that you were mentioning, that Ron, you were mentioning, I want to be sure that those got sent out on email because some of us can't write very fast. Got too old.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. Okay.
One second. The audio cut in and out. And so I wasn't quite sure that I heard Ruth. Was she asking for Ron Graybill's email address again? Was that what was being asked for?
All comments that he was making at that last, when he was giving directions on getting the information.
Okay. Well, let's get working on that, Ruth, because I'm not quite sure I understand. But email us or email Ron and we'll get it taken care of.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you very much. I want to go to George Tichy. Tichy, George had some comments in the chat. So do you want to take it, George, at this time?
Yes. Okay. Is my audio okay?
Yes, you're fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation, Ron. It was really interesting. And I liked the great hoax. That was funny. The great hoax. Probably one of all, it's only a volume of post-mortem productions by Ellen White. Okay. I think that 1844 for me became the big lie in Adventism, big lie. And I posted something on the chat saying that they needed at that time, right after 1844, they needed some explanations, they needed justifications, they wanted to play the victims of everything, they're loved by God, by victims of something that they didn't know exactly what it was. But it created a paranoia. They had to create a fear from someone, and they took the Catholic Church for that. Well, time elapsed, nothing happened, and I feel now that the paranoia is disappearing gradually, starting here in America. It's disappearing, it's getting, you know, we can talk about things even when we are recorded. I personally would talk about anything being recorded. So there is a new horizon. And so I would like to hear from you, how do you feel this fear that Adventism has had from the Catholics? And by the way, Jan Paulson is not a Jesuit. During the break, I checked with the Pope Francis, and he confirmed that Jan Paulson is not one of us.
Well, you know, I think understanding 1844 and the reaction and the different interpretations of it as time went on is really very cogently and helpfully discussed in that book by Ralph Polar. And I think, of course, and you know, many commentators have commented on how thoroughly anti-Catholic American Protestantism was in the 19th century, and how fearful Americans were as great masses of Irish Catholics came in with their drinking habits and their veneration of the Pope and so on. But I can't comment too much on it, but I just really recommend that book by Polar because it just really puts us in perspective and makes us understand it and not feel and not feel embarrassed or distressed by what happened. It happened, and we're here now, and we're still have our faith, and we're happy for that.
Okay, George. I would like
Yes,
to go to,
thank you.
no, go ahead. Go ahead, George.
No, yes, thank you.
Could I reply to George?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, nice to have you back, Dr. Tushy. We've missed you. First comment, I think the word "the hoax" was not Ron's, but someone he was quoting. Am I correct on that, Ron?
Oh, yes, it's not mine.
Okay. Secondly,
Okay.
I'd like to make a case for 1844 in this respect. It seems to me that if we step back and look at this more globally or more comprehensively, what happened when Hiram Edson went into the field there is that he was reassured, albeit in a way that we don't find persuasive, but he was reassured that God had not abandoned them and that God was still with them. And in fact, that's been the message of the sanctuary from the time of Exodus on. Build me a sanctuary that I might dwell with you. Same in John 1, where you get the sanctuary. The word is made flesh and sanctuaried among us. Or in Revelation, toward the end, it says that God will be with us. So all the way along through the history of Scripture and on, the idea of the sanctuary has been a reminder that we have not been abandoned by God. And in that sense, taking off the extraneous sort of baggage there, in that sense, I think it was a good thing. Third point, George, and I'm not disagreeing with you here, but I will say this. I am surprised by how deep and wide anti-Catholicism is amongst evangelical Adventists, amongst progressive Adventists, and amongst former Adventists. The worst thing one can say to another Adventist is that you are like a Roman Catholic. And think back on some of the decisions that have been made or the reactions that have been made about the women's ordination. And someone as otherwise as enlightened as George Knight has severely criticized the General Conference for being papist. Well, it's as though he could not think of a worse word to hurl at the General Conference than to say it's papist, and the executive committee of the General Conference is the Curia, and that the Biblical Research Institute is the Congregation for the Enforcement of Dogma, and so forth. So I wish, Dr. Tushy, that anti-Catholicism was on the wane, but I think it's pretty powerful, even amongst those who think of themselves as quite enlightened. Would you like to respond to that, George?
Yes. First, I would appreciate if you call me only George, okay? David, it's complex. 1844, I spent hundreds of hours in the early 80s restudying all my theology, and literally hundreds and hundreds of hours. And it's so complex that the disparity between that message and the content of the book of Hebrews. So at that time, I became a sola scriptura Christian, Adventist Christian, and it has been working for me well since, for 40 plus years. I think that it's time for, I don't know if the current church can be reformed. I'm thinking more of a neo-Adventism, maybe, because the roots are so deep in Ellen White that Adventists cannot talk 5 minutes without quoting her. Actually, I was amazed at Sligo today. I didn't hear her name once. That was the first time, for ages that there's a session, Adventist session, without mentioning Ellen White. And so in terms of doctrine, I think that if we want a clear and clean doctrine, we have to make corrections in terms of 1844. Even Hiram Edson, his supposed vision was not published or reviewed, basically, you know, that after so many years. And you have the shut door doctrine, and you have all that stuff. It's very complicated. I think that if the church didn't take advantage from Desmond Ford's courage to confront all this, that was the last chance, and the church will not have another chance. A neo-Adventism, and I think that we are kind of neo-Adventists, many of us, with our thinking in a different way from what we were, you know, taught years ago. That's just my opinion.
I'm going to respond. I see we have time, so I'm going to jump in here just a bit longer. I'm really thankful for your response, George. I would think that in terms of neo-Adventism, that maybe the best we can hope for is a kind of pluralistic Adventism, in that there are some forms of Adventism that would be acceptable to a person like you, but there are other forms of Adventism that will also coexist, so that we probably can't anticipate the whole denomination moving one way or the other, but from here on out, the denomination will be even more pluralistic than it has been from the beginning. And that's the only hope I have. I don't have any hope of transforming the whole denomination, but I do have hope that we can develop schools of thought within the denomination that would make it more comfortable for me to be an active Adventist. What do you think?
I think that the magic word is tolerance. I have no problem sitting on the same, you know, row with someone who is very conservative, if that person doesn't tell me that I am, you know, Satan's agent, and I will not do the same. So yeah, I think that pluralism is the final solution for that. But before that happens, we have to teach, learn, and practice through tolerance, religious tolerance. And I'm not sure that everyone can do that. There are many people that will not do that. For example, when Azure Hills chose the woman for pastor, many people left that church when they went to another congregation. So intolerance is so deeply rooted in our church that I don't know. I don't bet on anything, but that would be ideal. I would be totally comfortable with that, and it would be okay. That's my view.
Okay, thank you, George. Back to Forrest.
Okay, I'm gonna write some of this down. Very good, very good. I want to go to Peter. Peter. Okay, I think you're up, Peter. Tom.
Yes, thank you. Thank you again, Ron, for your presentation. I have a question. Don't you think that the renewed interest in the Adventist world for Sunday law could have been produced by Pope John Paul II's encyclica Dies Domini, published in 1998? John Paul was very, very interested in this problem. He considered that Sunday is at the heart of Christian tradition. And of course, there are millions of Catholics living not only in the United States, but throughout the world. And I believe it could have been the interest in the Adventist world produced also by this encyclica. What do you think?
Well, you know, the folks who anticipate a Sunday law are always looking for any mention of Sunday sacredness, any mention of ecumenical movements, any hint or clue that might suggest that there is an interest in Sunday legislation. But although in the things that the Pope has said about Sunday, I don't see anything really different than what a good Seventh-day Adventist minister would say about the seventh-day Sabbath, about its value and about its importance and so on. So until I get an encyclical or a statement from the Pope or one of his spokesmen suggesting that the whole world should enact and enforce Sunday sacredness, because otherwise the world would be destroyed by environmental catastrophe or economic distress or something like this. I think we're still, there's little hints and clues, and these encyclicals provide some of those hints and clues. But for me, it's Adventists have been looking at hints and clues ever since the 19th century, and until we get a little bit more explicit advocacy of enforcement of national or international Sunday laws, I'm not going to worry too much. But on the other hand, I think we should always be ready for Christ's coming, and we should always welcome and encourage hope that Jesus is coming again. But I just don't see enough yet to really persuade me that the Sunday laws are on the horizon, on the immediate horizon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ron. I'd like to ask a question at this juncture, if I could. And it's not so much about Sunday laws, but about the broader issue of conditional prophecy. We don't seem to have a struggle with conditional prophecy in the Bible. The Old Testament, of course, the classic example is Jonah and Nineveh. But when we come to Ellen White, we struggle with conditional prophecy. You want to comment on that? Is this much broader than Sunday laws?
Well, I don't think we've taken her own statement about conditional prophecy seriously enough, because we decided that a certain interpretation or a certain prophecy that she made is very important to us. And so we have trouble saying to ourselves, well, that could be conditional too. And that's what these recent commentators are suggesting, that maybe the changed conditions in the world might mean that we would see the dreadful things predicted in Revelation fulfilled in other ways. So yeah, we need to take, Ellen White herself, she said, am I accused of falsehood because time has continued longer than we first believed? How was it with the testimony of Christ and his disciples, And so she very clearly enunciates this principle of conditional prophecy, but we're reluctant to apply it when it touches on something that we are especially strong on.
Okay, thank you. I want to go to Eduardo. Eduardo, welcome back. Haven't seen you for a while. Welcome.
Thank you. Ron, can you tell us what is the idea of the book you recommend about the Bible and the Bible only?
Oh, listen, I just wanted to get that on the record and make a comment about it. I put in a chat to everyone a book about, let me see if I can get back up to it. Yeah, a book about John Wesley. And Wesley claimed to be a man of one book. And if you read the blurb or the information about this book by Donald Bullen and Kenneth G.C. Newport, by the way, Kenneth G.C. Newport is a former Adventist. And if you read the blurb in Amazon about this book, it explains how, yes, Wesley insisted that the Bible and the Bible only was his source. But when you really look at how Wesley interpreted the Bible, you realize that there were all these other forces that played on his interpretation, as it does with all of us. So before we insist that we only advocate the Bible and the Bible only, we need to be aware of these other factors that all play in the interpretations that any of us use. So if you look at the chat from me to everyone, that book, the title of it is A Man of One Book by Bullen and Newport. Just read the blurb there. It's just a very interesting insight into how we all interpret the Bible, even if we try to be exclusively the Bible and the Bible only.
Let me make a comment. I think that for the church, SDA church, that expression is suicidal.
That expression is what?
Suicidal.
Oh, suicidal. Suicidal. Okay.
Let me ask you a question. I don't have too much time to develop my idea, but when Sister White said that when she puts quotes on quotation marks, she said that's the original words from the angel or Jesus or God. You don't think that belongs to the Word of God, as some Bibles have the word of Jesus on red?
Well, I'm very glad you mentioned that, because she says, you know, the words that I use are my own, unless they be those spoken to me by an angel or my guide, you know, which I always put in marks of quotation. And so this would lead us to believe that anything in the marks of quotation are the exact words of her angel guide. And yet, when we look at some of those things, and you'll find it in one of my articles when I send you my life works, the discussion of this. When we look at some of those things, we discover that sometimes when she's quoting the words of her angel guide, she is actually quoting the words of Alfred Klumacher in his book, Elijah the Tishbite. So, well, maybe I guess the angel must have read Klumacher and decided to elevate those words to direct divine inspiration. So it's not quite as simple as saying, well, anything that Ellen White puts in quotation is the exact dictation from heaven.
Allow me another comment. When I compare some other teachings of other denominations, I come with the idea that these people have no brains, because the interpretation of some prophecies or some scriptures, in my SDA mind, they have no brain. To me, only makes sense as the SDA church understand it, and the SDA church understand it because Ellen G. White try to listen to any school of theology of the world and see their interpretations. Comes the idea that these people have no brain, even though they have the Bible. What do you think?
Well, I think I will respond to that by simply saying that those same people, when they read what you say and listen to what you say, they think you have no brain. So, you know, we all need to study for ourselves and so on. And certainly there's a lot of biblical interpretation out there that is not helpful and that we might find bizarre and so on. But find what is good and useful and use that. And but just be aware that there are other people that think that Eduardo in his argument sometimes has no brain, because we think that of the others and they think that of us.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Thank you. I want to go to, I think it's Donna, not Jeff, but whoever's speaking. Donna or Jeff?
Wait,
You want to be on?
yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I just wanted Ron to comment, if you can, about Martin Luther and the beasts of Revelation. I had always thought that a lot of what we picked up and kind of wove into our theology of the eschaton came from Luther, but I could be wrong. He seemed to vilify the church that he left and the officials of that. But is that the case? And did Protestantism kind of pull it down even into Adventism eventually?
You know, that is a topic that I'm very ill-informed on. I suspect if I look closely at Martin Luther, I'd find out that he found the Jews to be villains too. I don't know, but
Definitely.
yeah. So there are people who've studied Reformation history and Martin Luther particularly, and sometime maybe we'll have some of them on one of our Zoom meetings, and we can talk about Martin Luther's eschatology. That would be an interesting topic, David, if you could find a Luther expert to discuss Luther's eschatology.
But I was thinking particularly with his identification of, again, I could be wrong, the beast, which was the main topic of your initial presentation today. Was it not he who identified not the church of, well, obviously not the beast as the United States, but the villains of Revelation, and the woman, the Scarlet Woman, and so forth. I don't know, Dave, someone else who knows more about church history, or maybe Peter, if he's still on, can say something about it. I thought it didn't come sua sponte from us. In other words, I think we had gotten it from elsewhere before we became a denomination.
Well, yes.
Go ahead, Ron.
Peter may be more conversant with Luther's eschatology certainly than I am.
I think Froome's prophetic faith of our fathers would be a source one could consider on that matter.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Great. I think, Donna, we can't answer your question, but thank you for asking.
That I wanted one other tangential,
ahead.
perhaps, comment to make. I have been very fond of a footnote in one of the U.S. Supreme Court cases from the early part of the last century, and you've heard me quote it before, in which the justice talked about evolving standards of decency that mark the progress of a maturing society. And it seems to me that phrase or that sentence could be applied to the Adventist Church. We have, we hope, evolving standards of decency. And so I don't find it difficult to connect us to, or I don't find the need to tear down the virtual statues, so to speak, of our spiritual forefathers. They did good things and bad things. They bequeathed us a great church, a great system, I think, and gets better as we go along. And I don't think we should be too worried about castigating the figures of the past. That's just a comment.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you. I would like, Dorothy Cupino, you had made a comment. Did you want to comment on that? About being no, or she's wanted to know if intolerance was God's gatekeepers. So I thought that would, go ahead, Dorothy.
Well, I think George put it in a very succinct way. So just check his on the chat.
Okay, thank you, thank you. All right, let me see, Laura, you had something up on the chats too. Did you want to comment on that? Are you still here with us, Laura?
Yeah, I'm here. I didn't
Yeah,
really
okay.
have a comment. I
Yeah.
think what I wrote was what I thought. But I would just, I guess, elaborate to say that, you know, I spent most of my life in a certain portion of Adventism. And it wasn't until I came to a different part of the country and found that Adventism really was very pluralistic. And I had been strangely, you know, unaware of that. And I know that seems maybe silly, but when you live in, you know, in Loma Linda and as I did for most of my life, it's easy to think that that's the way Adventism is. And when you go outside of Loma Linda and find that many Adventists can be really quite unkind about a certain kind of Adventist that they perceive to be from other parts of the country, not their part. You know, I have found it very distressing and difficult. And so, yeah, I would love to see tolerance towards a pluralistic Adventism, but I don't know where it's going to start because, you know, it's fine for, as I said, liberal Adventists to say we tolerate all different beliefs and we're happy to sit at the table with everyone, which I feel the same way. But if the other Adventists won't say that back, how do we go on? I'd love to hear someone comment on that.
Do you want to comment, Ron?
Well, you know,
The audio has paused.
Yeah, he's
for me.
frozen there. Are you frozen up, Ron? Can you get out of that?
Forrest, can I comment on that? Yeah.
Is that Bob Ford?
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It seems to me this relates to a little bit earlier. If we look at the people that became the first Adventists, you know, back in the mid 1800s, many of them came out of a particular cultural frontier background. I know there are historians that have talked about how Adventism arose and how the Jehovah's Witness and Christian Science and so on. And in that period, there was, particularly in America, there was a lot of anti-Catholic feelings and so on that you know, that, and I think Ron has mentioned this today, that we bring our cultural and historical biases to how we look at prophecy. And I think that can be seen. And I was really pleased to see Ron mention that as we get people from around the world in the church, as they start looking at prophecy, you know, they're not looking at it with some of the American biases that we might have. And I think I'm hopeful, I hope that we can be tolerant enough of those different perspectives and then stay in the same church. So whether it will work or not, I know sometimes we can be a little bit concerned, but I hope. Now, I live in a small church, so I know exactly what the last speaker was talking about. If you're quotes liberal Adventist in a very small church, it can be very uncomfortable. And that's unfortunate. But I think if those of us that maybe consider ourselves to be liberal we need to also be understanding that there are people that grow up in very conservative, narrow environments, and we need to understand where they're coming from. So tolerance has to go both ways. So I hope that thing. But I had a question.
We don't have Ron up. That's the problem with it.
Oh, he's not there. Okay.
Yeah, he got frozen, and I'm not sure what the answer is to that.
Well, let me raise the question, and maybe he'll hear
Okay.
it, or someone can put it in the chat. I was going to ask Dave also, when he read from Revelation 13, we see here in America now, and this is around the world, the rise of Christian nationalism, a very nationalistic approach to Christianity. And some of it, of course, is built around Zionism and what's supposedly is going to happen in the Middle East, and Armageddon and all of that. And I was just wondering, is there any legitimacy to broadening it instead of looking at Sunday laws and things like that, but look at the dangers of state and religion combinations, nationalism, using Christianity as a way to enforce their perspectives? To me, that's a bigger worry today if we look at what's happening in the US, but it's happening in other countries as well. Nationalism and the church is a bad combination. And I think that's one of the messages of Revelation 13. What do you think? What some of the others think?
Maybe we can read John Jones's comment from
Yeah,
chat
there you go.
here, because I think it's directly pertinent. Go ahead, Forrest. Do you want to read this? I'm afraid
I
if
don't
we
know,
ask
maybe
John to comment, he won't say everything that's there. So maybe we'll read this and then ask him to comment. He says,
Okay.
perhaps
just a
the
minute.
greatest hope for Dave Larson's vision of an Adventism that shares various perspectives on any issues is precisely Adventism's missionary outreach to diversity of cultures. Nothing is more awakening to the insularity of certain of our traditional perspectives than spending a major portion of one's professional life on the other side of the world. There, our obsession with Roman Catholicism, and especially with Sunday laws, is met by complete befuddlement, even in a classroom full of SDA pastors, to say nothing of lay people. To them, the spontaneous question is, why are you beating this drum? What is the likelihood of Sunday laws in India, Africa, China, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, Israel, Iran, and Egypt? How are we as pastors to minister, I suppose, to these populations? Oh, no. How are we as pastors to these populations supposed to preach the gospel of this to our people? Okay, let's see if John wants to add or subtract anything from that.
Thank you. We have spoken, first of all, a quick little footnote here. On the third line of my note, perspectives on any issues. That was supposed to be many issues. You see me catching that. We have had a great deal of wisdom from a variety of perspectives expressed here, and I respect and appreciate all of it. On the one hand, we've spoken of the need for us to accommodate people whose cultural and religious background may be very constricted. At the same time, we are equally challenged by people whose cultural and religious background is altogether different from ours and call us not to reinforce the strictures, but precisely to come up with a third angel's message, a three angels message that addresses the pertinent issues in China, in Indonesia, and in Iraq and Iran. Any obsession with Sunday laws is simply irrelevant, and this is not recent. I speak from experience that reaches back to the 80s, the 70s, and the 60s. This is not new.
I would agree completely. I ran into some of the same perspectives working in Africa and in Latin America. We really need to take apart the fact that we are a world movement. We're not an American movement any longer. If anything, the American parts of it should be we need to be careful about pushing that too broadly. So, yeah. But anyway, what do you think about the whole issue of nationalism? Because Christian nationalism is not just an American phenomenon. It's rising in Europe. We see it happening in the Middle East. I've seen it arise in Latin America. You know, the combination of state power and orientation with the church to back it up. To me, that's one of the biggest dangers that we're facing in the world today.
Yes, that's much more pertinent issue.
Okay, can I go to Monty? Do you want to enter into this? You want to ask Ron a question? He's still not back yet.
Well, my
Ron is back.
question.
What?
Ron is back.
He is.
Yes.
Where are you, Ron? Ron?
Well, I see him there.
Apparently his entire computer froze up. That's what he's emailed us, and he's having to reboot his entire computer.
While we're doing it, Gil Valentine had a comment. Gil, did you want to read it? You want me to read it, or did you want to comment on it?
I'm not sure, Forrest, that my microphone is working.
I can hear you.
Okay?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I would just like to affirm John's observation about the way forward for the church being partly a recognition of the rich diversity of Adventism across cultures. I remember in Pakistan thinking a great deal every Friday about lunchtime when a dozen mosques turned their big loudspeakers onto the campus to convert us with their prayers every Friday. But Sunday laws didn't make any sense at all. The whole nation, 100 million people went to worship on Friday. And even the whole idea of the Western religious tradition, you know, our prophetic interpretation in the context of Europe didn't make any sense to them. They had no knowledge at all about Western European history, but they did know about their Moguls, about their Mughal emperors, and their artistic contribution and their architecture, and they were richly blessed by them. They were very proud of their own civilization and their tradition. And to be able to interpret Adventism in that culture was a real challenge. We didn't do it very successfully. But I think that the idea of Sunday laws and our prophetic interpretation needs to have a much broader perspective than what we've given it. In fact, I recall when I was in Thailand and the Buddhist educational authorities didn't like us teaching Daniel and Revelation. We had to, in order to teach the content of that class, we had to rename it and call it the history of the Western religious tradition. And to treat it academically like that, they were more comfortable. But don't call it Daniel and Revelation, it doesn't apply here.
Okay.
So I appreciate John's comment, very helpful, John.
Okay, I'm seeing Ron coming back on. Are you on yet, Ron?
Well, I think, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. I don't see your visage, so.
I'm still trying to do that. I've actually rebooted my whole computer and tried twice to get back in and so on, but you guys do just fine without me, so that's good too.
Well, yeah, but anyway, I do have some questions here. Monty, did you want to make your question to Ron now, or?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go.
And it may be for other people as well, but I first want to acknowledge, I think it's been helpful to hear people talking about or questioning the relevance of Sunday laws around the world. But I'd just like to ask the question, what do we mean by Sunday law? And how does that become a threat that then becomes such an existential threat that brings our world to an end, you know, this final event? So Ron, as you've studied this, what would, because I'm a policy person, so when I think anytime there's something like this, I think, well, how would you write that? What would a Sunday law actually look like? And why would that hurt us?
Well, it's interesting. Watching these videos, you know, one of the fellows pointed out that it doesn't matter if there's a new Sunday law in Jamaica or a new Sunday law somewhere in Africa, because the prophecy in Ellen White is that the United States will take the lead in establishing the Sunday law. So it needs to come from the United States first. But somehow the United States, in collusion with all the Protestant denominations and with the Catholic Church, has to persuade, it sounds to me like it have to persuade all the nations of the world to individually pass a law that not only meant that you had to rest on Sunday, that you couldn't be working on Sunday, but that you could not observe the seventh day Sabbath. So it just the logistics of trying to write such a law would be forbidding, and that you could get all, I mean, one of the videos that David recommended that we watch, this one about Roger Williams, at the beginning of the commentator, it talked about religious persecution and religious executions in today's world, you know, and so on and so forth. And I thought, my goodness, people are being killed for their religious beliefs. And but to think that it would that the Buddhists who are killing people because they don't accept Buddhism would suddenly decide, oh yes, we ought to go along with the Pope, and we ought to enforce Sunday observance, and we ought to hunt down and kill the Seventh-day Adventists who are going to church on Saturday. It just staggers the mind to think of how in the world this could ever happen. And you know, it makes us think that it could never happen because it's just too complex and too bizarre. But if you listen to these people who say the Sunday law is coming and so on, this is the kind of thing that somehow, and there's another element too, and that is that the reason the whole world will follow the Pope's direction is because the whole world will become convinced that all of these disasters that we're experiencing, all of the earthquakes and all of the volcanoes and all of the economic collapse and all of that and all of the tidal waves and earthquakes, all of these are coming upon the earth now because God is unhappy with us because we're not observing Sunday properly. And once the whole world is convinced of that, then they'll follow the Pope's direction and enact a Sunday law in every country. Now, I hate to use Eduardo's terminology, but it does seem to me that anyone who expects all of that to happen in that way, and maybe I'm not, you know, maybe these people are wrong in what others, but they seem to be saying that. Anybody who expects all of that to happen are lacking in brains. That's the end of my speech.
Okay, thank you, Ron. I want to go to Laura. Did you wanted to say something, Laura? Ask a question, comment?
I was writing a comment, but surely you can't see my comment as I write it. I was just saying that I certainly find common belief with many of the speakers here talking about international Adventist church, because I also lived internationally as a child, as a missionary's child. And so to me, I guess the question is, what is it we do? What do we do about American Adventism? This, I think, is where maybe the problem sits. How do we? I'm getting an echo. I don't know why. But this is, to me, where we need to make.
I'm trying to figure out how to, oh. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go on. Maybe we'll come back to Laura here. Are you back on, Laura? Carol, did you have something you wanted to say, a comment? I'm trying to remember if you wrote something in the chat. Did you want to say something, Carol? I'll read it.
Well, I would
Okay,
just read my comment. Basically, the comment isn't questioning of the Sunday law issue so touchy among Adventists because it calls into question the centrality or the central doctrine of the Sabbath. Seems to me that the church's existence is built around that doctrine.
Okay. Ron? Ron, are you there? You're on mute now, Ron. Well, now Ron's having trouble over there, I guess.
I have a comment, Forrest.
I'm sorry?
I have a comment.
Okay, hang on. Okay, go on that question.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, bud.
Some years ago, I attended a camp meeting at Grand Ledge and listened to Forrest Edamore speak. And he was reminding us that in the early days of the PA system, he was involved with it. And when he was speaking and had a particular point that he felt was necessary to make, all of a sudden the PA system squawked and carried on terribly. And he was making the suggestion that he felt that perhaps anything and everything electronic was of the devil. I think of that when I think I hear the issues as it relates to our audio perspective.
Yeah.
And working with Southern California Presbyterian homes for 20 years, I had some very very excellent friends who were 100 years old, and I shared that narrative with them, and one or two said, well, it is satanic, is it not? And basically those people wanted nothing to do with computerization. It's just an interesting point.
Thank you, bud.
That's humorous.
Thank you. You know, I would say, Carol, I think you have a good point about the centrality of the Sabbath, Seventh-day Sabbath. And so when there's comment about Sunday laws, that takes on an added dimension. But it seems to be one of the most tangible or visible prophecy fulfillments that Adventists think they have. So I don't know, someone else, David, did you want to comment on that? Or Ron is off now, I guess. He's going to stay off.
I'd like to say something about the Sunday law. It seems to me that at least a very important root of that is economic. The cases, the Supreme Court cases that deal with that were brought mainly by Jews because they wanted to keep, of course, their stores open on Sunday. and the Sunday laws prevented them from doing that. And although there was a religious element, wanting everyone to worship on that same day, the resistance to overturning or to wiping them off the books came not from any real religious motive, but from an economic motive, because Gibmo's, some of the big department stores that we think about in Philadelphia and New York were Jewish owned, and there was competition with Christian owned department stores, and they just didn't, they wanted to keep the Sunday laws as much as possible, in effect, for that reason. So it's not easy, or it's not easy now to imagine the return in the extreme secularism that we live in this country, at least, a return to that kind of restriction. I can't imagine it now.
Thank you, Don. David, I have two more questions, and we've got just a few minutes. You want to take those questions, or what do you advise?
Let's take them, then we'll conclude after those.
Okay, it's a repeat, Sue. Come back to you.
Well, I don't really have a question as much as some comments.
Okay, that's fine.
Laura left us, but one thing that I find helpful to do when people are intolerant of various perspectives is to quote Ellen White, because the conservative people always like her. And she said, and this is something I heard from John Pauline once, she said that we should treat every man as honest, and there are many who work in midnight darkness now who will turn to light at the end when they see it. And so that tends to help people. Yeah, it forces them, if they're Ellen White aficionados, that it forces them to reconsider and think, well, maybe I shouldn't be so judgmental about this or that person. I found it helpful anyway. And another thing I wanted to just touch on was this Eurocentric interpretation of Daniel and Revelation. Stavanovich, the one that worked on Daniel, not the one that worked on Revelation, he gave a talk at Pine Knoll, and he said that he ran into people worldwide who were just flabbergasted. Why is this Eurocentric? We're here too. What does Daniel and Revelation mean to us? And he wrote an article saying that we should broaden our perspective on Daniel and Revelation. And, the Eurocentric application is one, but there might be one that's Asian as well, with the persecution that God people face there, etc. And it was accepted by the review, and it was published. So, and another thing that came to my mind was, I believe it was Tonestead, where I read that, it might be best to look at these periods of time, like 1260 days, as just periods that refer to persecution figuratively, not necessarily that it has to be 1,260 days or days per year, but just look at it as a period of time where persecution took place. And I think that's helpful to people who don't relate to the Eurocentric interpretation that we have in, say, Great Controversy. Another thing that came to my mind was, the Sunday law issue. I think Christian nationalism is maybe one of our biggest dangers when it comes into legislating against certain religions. One thing that I think might unify not only our country but the world is not only the what Ellen White calls the judgments of God, all these catastrophes and disasters, but this false Christ that Thessalonians says will appear. Revelation hints at it in Revelation 13 for Tonestad's interpretation. And, I think Ellen White's very clear on what she thinks about it, that a false Christ will come and everybody says we have world peace at last. But his only problem is he can't stand it that people aren't showing honor to him because of Sunday. Sunday's not being kept. Sabbath is being kept. He changed it. He's God. He has the arbitrary right to change arbitrary laws. And he hates the Sabbath so much, according to what I've gleaned from Maxwell, he hates it because of the fact it says so much about the love of God. And he doesn't like that. So I think, the false Christ factor in the equation might be something that changes everything. We look at the equation now and think, how can that be? How can that work out to be at this end of the equation? But if another factor is entered in, I think perhaps what we say is it seems so impossible now. And Ellen White says the same thing. It's going to look impossible to people, and they're just going to say, what? You're crazy. But when it happens, they'll see that indeed this was what was prophesied. A false Christ will show up. He will unify the world, and he won't like people who keep God's commandments.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.
First, you forgot about me.
Oh, I've got, David, there are three that I forgot to write McKinley down. Peter, I'm going to go to McKinley first. If you don't mind. Go ahead, McKinley. You didn't pay enough token today, McKinley. So
I know. But thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Larson, for the indulgence. But I got a couple of observations. The first thing is I want to thank Donna for consistently reminding us about the value of the foundations and contributions of our Adventist forebears. And I also appreciated the good historical review that Dr. Ronald Graybill gave about the two-horned beast. I was pleasantly surprised to know that the interest in the two-horned beast dates back to 1382. Here are my observations about the presentation. First, it seems to me that varied views over the years about the two-horned beast have been attempts by Adventists and others to understand the times and know what Adventists ought to do contemporaneously. This would be following the tradition of the people of Issachar, who would distinguish themselves by understanding their times and knowing what Israel ought to do. This perspective allows the possibility that such contemporaneous understandings may not necessarily be predictive. My second observation is that on the level of individual spiritual growth and health, understanding the times helps us know what type of people we can be by attitude, character, and outlook as we await the Lord's return. Hopefully, that outlook can be built on God's pillars of governance that is founded on love. So I think it seems to me that this perspective can help navigate some of the struggles some have with the focus on the role of the United States in prophecy. So that's my comment.
okay, thank you, McKinley. And we come now to the pièce de la résistance, Peter. You're muted, Peter. There you're open. Okay, now.
We're talking lately a lot about the danger nationalism, Christian nationalism in the United States. But we don't talk at all about the trend against Christianity in the United States, which in my view is more dangerous than Christian nationalism. And I will give an example, a recent example, but there are many trends to exemplify what I am saying here. What about last year, the setting fire on one of the historical churches across the White House, Presbyterian Church, and many other anti-Christian attitudes and trends existent in the United States? What about the fact that it's a trend to wipe out the Judeo-Christian main contribution in the culture of the West? And in my view, this is more dangerous than the Christian nationalism. I don't see anything wrong being a Christian nationalist. I don't see anything wrong in loving your country and wishing the best for it, because that doesn't mean that you are hating other countries. That means that it's in line with what the Bible said. You have to pray and wish that your country will be prosperous, will be good. And I think it's in line with Christian creed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your comment. I'm going to refer now to David. Going to turn this over to you.
Well, you all remember the story, but I'll repeat it anyway, about the man who made a presentation. Someone said, well, you said something differently last time. And the man says, yes, you're right. Then he said, well, you said something differently on a second time. And he said, yes, you're right about that. Then the man said, you're contradicting yourself. And he said, yes, you're right about that. So we have different points of view on these matters. I would say that Peter represents one point of view that we really need to take seriously, and that Bob represents another point of view that we need to take equally seriously, and that it's not a matter of choosing one or the other, but choosing both and trying on a case-by-case basis to do as much justice to both as we can. The moral life, again, as you heard me say, is not a matter of just finding the one consideration and making it actionable. It's a matter of weighing competing claims and doing the best one can to honor them all. And I think that's where we are here on this business of the church and the state. On the one hand, we need to be honorable toward it and love it. On the other hand, we need to be cautious because it can use coercive power in very destructive ways. So let's hang on to both Bob and Peter and work our way through it. Now, next time, I should say, Steve Daly and I are working out a schedule such that he could be with us either in August or September. We're not quite sure when that will be. And I myself am as equally interested in his theology of the covenant as I am in his comments about Ellen White. And I have indicated that to him, and we will discuss that with him. As a preview to that, and as a postlude on the quarterly for recent times, I'm going to try to say something about the covenant next week. And basic thesis I have is that there is only one God, and that means there's only one covenant. And I think that's different from what Steve will say, though I don't know that for sure. Okay, here's the benediction, and I will leave it on after the recording is over. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
David, can I ask? Yeah.